Let's go to our weekly SOS house calls. We bring on Amy Grover, sports medicine coordinator for SOS. Amy, thanks so much for coming on. How are you today?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me again.
We're doing great. So this year's theme for Athletic Training Month is Champions in Healthcare. What is the significance of this theme? Let's start right there.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the way I see it is like a play on sports. That's our traditional setting. Obviously now too, when we're talking about everything with the tournament and thinking about sports and championships and kind of like putting that play together, because the traditional setting for athletic trainers is with high school sports, collegiate sports, professional sports. But I also think it kind of highlights that we're really kind of like one of the biggest advocates for athletes. Their health is our priority. Having them be successful, whether it's in their rehab or their sport or where they're going after in their career, is a priority for us. Their growth is a priority for us. So kind of like a two-way play on it.
You touched on it right there, the role of athletic trainer. How has that role or how has, I guess, sports medicine in general changed since you got into this field?
Yeah, it is really evolving outside of that traditional setting that I was just mentioning. It is very common now to have athletic trainers in what we call the industrial setting, which is really more of like a workforce emphasis. So we're thinking, when you think like, what does that mean? So they're working for Amazon, they're working at National Grid, they're working at these companies where it's not necessarily an athlete, but there's similar orthopedic injuries, and so really getting into more of like that daytime shift. So really stepping more into that setting.
You touched on athletic trainers in the workplace. Can you get a little bit more in depth into that and how the role of athletic trainer differs in these different settings, right? A school, or working with a team versus, the workplace.
Yeah, it actually is pretty different. So when we're looking at like the workforce or a workplace, they're really kind of working under OSHA guidelines. So it's much more around injury prevention. In fact, that's typically what their title is an injury prevention specialist, and more of like a first aid care. And then anything above that would get referred out to the appropriate provider, whereas in a school setting or a clinic setting, it's everything from the injury prevention and the assessment and the first aid to the on-site treatment, the on-site rehab. There's a lot more happening in those traditional settings that doesn't always have to get referred out, but oftentimes does as well.
Amy Grover from SOS joining us here on Orange Nation. And Amy, I mentioned your title, sports medicine coordinator. What does your role entail that people may not know about or directly think about as being part of your job?
Yeah, I love that question. A large part of what I do is the relationship building with all of the teams and the schools and the organizations that we work with, being that advocate for our own athletic trainers, having a lot of conversations with schools and organizations that don't already have an athletic trainer. They already know why they need one, and helping them figure out how we can get them one or how they can get one on their own. But also a lot of education around both sides of things, the wide range of capabilities that athletic trainers have within our scope of practice, and then also the limitations of the scope. And so there's still a lot of misconceptions. And so that education for whether it's people in the community or even, schools and organizations about what that athletic trainers can and can't do, it's a huge part of what I'm doing day to day.
We do a lot with college sports here and, covering the Syracuse teams in Lemoyne and all the neighboring colleges. We often hear this idea that, 18 to 21-year-olds can go out there, they can play a full game, they need minimal rest. Can you speak to the validity of that claim about and how the process of aging can impact an athlete's stamina and performance, risk of injury, those things? And are there any benchmarks in terms of ages where you start to significantly see changes to the athlete's body and to that claim?
Yeah, I think that is crazy. There is so much research now about the importance of rest, whether that is having that rest like in an actual game or between games, especially as we get older. I would say like around the age of 30 is definitely when things start to change, whether it's you're a male or a female, and rest becomes even more important. I actually heard a fascinating statistic in a podcast just yesterday that reportedly LeBron James spends $1.5 million annually on his sleep routine and prioritizing rest. That right there tells you how important it is. And so the idea of like these younger athletes being able to go through an entire game without rest during that, or not having adequate rest between, is not a notion that people should be pushing, and instead we need to be advocating for the appropriate amount of rest and sleep for the recovery, whether we're younger or especially once we get into that middle age, and then obviously even more important as we become a little bit older.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with the results, right, of not just LeBron's performance, but his longevity, his ability to stay healthy, although he is injured right now, but he's done a very good job for the most part avoiding injuries throughout his career. Amy, great stuff. Yeah. Thanks so much for the insight. We appreciate you coming on. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Amy Grover from SOS. And with that, we'll hit a timeout. We got the voice of the Orange, Matt Park, joining us next on ESPN Radio.